Hi, everyone. Good morning from Washington, D.C. It's great to have you with us today for what I think is going to be a very exciting discussion about the Pacific Island, which is a region that has really grown in importance, I think, for the United States over the past couple of years. By matter of introduction, my name is Parker Novak, and I'm a non-resident fellow with the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub and Indo-Pacific Security Initiative and lead much of our work on the Pacific Islands. We're really lucky today to have a great cross section of panelists with us, calling in from all over the world, from locations ranging to Port Moresby to Aniara to Washington and more, who have worked across government, NGOs, the private sector, and so much more, and really bring to bear a great expertise on the region in their chosen fields. I'm going to save the panelist introductions for now, but do want to set the stage for today's discussion, which is really well timed because it's coming on the heels of the annual Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Meeting, which took place last week in Tonga, which is a highlight on the region's diplomatic calendar that really elevates Pacific perspectives on the region's most pressing challenges, whether they be climate change, connectivity, economic development, and so many more. And I think this year, notably, geopolitics really loomed over the proceedings, and that's ultimately what we're here to discuss today as this vast maritime region has drawn increasing interest from outside powers, whether they be the United States, People's Republic of China, Japan, India, and more. And we also saw geopolitics interplay with key issues at the leaders' meeting last week. You saw the announcement of the Pacific Policing Agreement between Australia and the Pacific Islands countries, which carries implications in the security space. And you also saw a lot of drama around the final communique pertaining to Taiwan that got a lot of attention and really highlighted geopolitical competition in the region. And I think this year's leaders meeting also came at a time where Pacific Island nations are increasingly asserting themselves on matters of foreign policy, whether it be Fijian Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka's zone of peace concept that he's actively advocated before, or Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu writing their first ever foreign policy and national security white papers. You really are seeing those Pacific voices growing louder and louder. And I think, the leaders meeting really tees up today's discussion quite well, where we're not only going to have a broad regional focus, but we're also going to hone in on the three countries of which the United States has a compact of free association relationship with the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. We're also going to talk about working alongside allies and partners, as this is a region that is absolutely crucial for the United States to do so. Countries like Australia, Japan, and so many others. And it's also really important, I think, for the United States to be ensuring we're listening and learning for Pacific Island countries and working in concert with them. I'm particularly excited to hear those perspectives on today's panel. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Kaush Ara, who is a non-resident senior fellow with our Global China Hub. And alongside that, he's a senior visiting fellow at the Kroc Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue University, and throughout his career has served in numerous senior government roles, including at the U.S. Agency for International Development, Department of State, and Department of Interior. With that, on behalf of the Global China Hub and Indo-Pacific Security Initiative, I want to thank you for attending today. And Couch, over to you to get the conversation started.
Thanks a lot, Parker. And once again, good morning, fellas, and good evening, and good night, all this stuff, wherever time zone you guys are in. Appreciate your time. Let me sort of pick up where Parker left out. I think very importantly and very simply, in the middle of the ocean, which is the largest ocean and the area that's usually on the back end of world map when we look at it in the flat part of it, are islands which are very critical to American national security. The fact of the matter is that as America's adversary, which is China, in which case if America was to provide a forward posture for support of its allies, whether it be Japan, whether it be Taiwan, whether it be Philippines, it requires a free use of that sea to be able to deploy its forces. And it would be very harmful for American interest if China was able to either interrupt that free flow or get behind American lines in this case. So that's the state of the play, very simply put, why these islands are really, really important. And America paid for them in very high blood and trust cost in World War II. And then, in good days, it chose to neglect a little bit of them than it should have. And now they have to put more attention in. So we are in this sort of very interesting phase where the relevance of these islands is center stage, and we have to talk about how best to solidify and move forward on the historical association that US and allies have with this part of the world. So to that end, also, it's important to note that this is an area where domestic American policies and foreign international American policies come together. It's not always that happens. It also happens in our legislative committees and our domestic and foreign institutions within the government. So we'll kick it off with the domestic aspect of it, with the House Natural Resources Committee under the chairmanship of Arkansas Representative Bruce Westerman, took a very strong leadership in ensuring that the compact of freely associated nations, that happened, the agreement was renewed. And so love to hear from the chairman's perspective. We'll first ask the deputy director of the House Natural Resources Committee, Chris, to give his thoughts on the leadership and the perspectives of what it took to do it, why is it important, and what are the next steps when we go forward. Over to you, Chris.
Good morning, all. Thank you so much for having us today. I think when people think of the Natural Resources Committee, we think of trees and rocks and national parks, and that's all great. But one of the cool things about our committee is that we also have the Compacts of Free Association, and that was it was a great endeavor to work on that. It was a passion project for the chairman, and something that when we walked into it, we looked at the price tag, we looked at those kind of things, and in this Congress, your eyes kind of open wide. $7.1 billion in mandatory spending is a lot of money anywhere. And in this Congress, it's not the kind of thing we move routinely. But the thing I think we all were amazed by as we approached this was there was kind of an angle for everyone, right? You have the international diplomacy, you have sort of the good guy politics of America as a world leader that appeals to many, and the national defense issues that exist in the Pacific. I think we really got a good understanding of the strategic importance of these islands. When you put it in a historical context, there's only so many ways to bop across the Pacific and put supply chains in place. The Japanese showed us how that worked in World War II, and it's the same pattern you're seeing in China now. When we had the opportunity to go out to the Pacific Islands, which was just an amazing experience with Chairman Westerman and a codel of members who have, and it was one of the first visits of a congressional codel out there in some time. But to see it firsthand and to see what China is doing out there, not just to our allies of the FAS, but in many regions of the Pacific, was just eye-opening. We heard from folks in the hospitality industry who would talk about Chinese groups making massive hotel reservations, locking up entire hotels in areas where their tourism industry is what drives their economy. These would often happen in relationship with ongoing negotiations between PRC and the country of the country that we're looking at, and you'd find that there was a significant pattern of, when the negotiations went well from the PRC's perspective, all those reservations showed up, and the community had a good week, a good month. If the negotiations didn't go the way the PRC was looking, well, all those reservations got canceled just in time to really ruin someone's day. Right? It's economic warfare that they're conducting. It's working on their elite capture program. Right? Really trying to pull over community leaders, state leaders, and national leaders in those areas to just undermine U.S. interests and undermine our relationships with those nations. I remember one of the contrasts that I saw was in I believe it was in the Republic of the Marshall Islands. We visited a construction site that was supported by the Navy Seabees, but that was hiring local labor and injecting money into their economy. And then we moved down the road and found a significant construction site funded by China. Interestingly, totally worked by imported Chinese labor, not injecting money into the community, and ultimately not providing sort of the economic value and the long-term benefit that a good economic engine can provide. It's unfortunate to see, right? I mean, this is, I feel strongly that the United States position here, yes, is about maintaining national security for our nation, but it's also about building up our FAS partners and working together as a team. I think that what we've seen in the PRC examples that we came across, this is about bolstering their own economy and using the natural resources and using the other strengths of these FAS nations for the purposes of bettering the PRC's people. That's not how we want to do business. That's not how Chairman Westerman wants to do business, and that's why that's one of the reasons that we got so engaged on this issue. The reality is the FAS nations are among our strongest allies internationally. We have made a commitment to them through the Compacts of Free Association, and the United States needs to continue to show that they back, support, and will sustain those compacts over the long term. Yes, it was important that we renewed the Compacts of Free Association. We regard it as one of our largest legislative accomplishments of this Congress. But the most important thing is that the United States remains engaged and remains present over the long term. This isn't the kind of issue where we can show up, sign a compact, go back to our daily lives and revisit it in another 20 years, because that's not how the Chinese are handling this. That's not their objective here. The Chinese objective is persistent, and it's ongoing, and it's a threat to our national security and a threat to the security of the FAS. We need to remain engaged. We need to remain present, and we need to sustain these over the life cycle and continue to grow and mature and nurture these partnerships. One of the most important things we need to do is finish the federal programs and services agreements with the island nations. Palau, particularly important, is working towards its expiration. But it's the signal. We need to send the signals that we're prioritizing these relationships, and we continue to be engaged. Republic of the Marshall Islands is also being worked on. We need to sign those. We need to get those done. We need to maintain the security of these nations. I think that if there's one takeaway, it's that these islands aren't just nations that we help with, that we support. These are also nations that we have a significant interest in through our defense, through our economic security, and through the ability to engage with them and support the larger Indo-Pacific. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap off and just hand it back to Karsh for our next speakers. Looking forward to the panel and the discussion today. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Chris. Really appreciate it. It's not often that you hear a domestic side speaking so sort of strongly on these issues, so appreciate that immensely. Zach, over to you. I think we don't have to talk about all the sort of malign actions of China. Let's focus on what we can do. So what is it that we should be doing in this part of the world? So over to you. And I appreciate the leadership of Senator Schatz on this, and yourself too, Zach. So over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and the credit's really to Senator Schatz, who's personally invested in highlighting the importance of the Pacific Islands in the Senate here, and I'm glad to offer a little bit of additional perspective from our position on the Hill. We're biased. I'm biased, but congressional role here, as Chris laid out as well, is incredibly important as we go forward, not only from the renewed compacts that he discussed, but this week we saw coming out of the leaders meeting, the U.S. government announcing an intent to provide additional funding for resilient infrastructure financing. Also needs congressional approval, and so there's quite a lot of cooperation that needs to go on between the executive and legislative branches. So really appreciate the opportunity to highlight some of that. Congress also, of course, is focused on China. And I think we in the national security community are very aware of some of the implications of some pernicious PRC policies. And it's very critical that the U.S. continues to advocate for its interest and promote our values in the Pacific through the broader Indo-Pacific as well, and around the world. But I would highlight also there is this tricky nature where everyone's aware of the competition going on, but we also need to be careful not to overplay it in our engagement with the region. throughout the Pacific Islands. They're well aware of the competition. Many are wary about potentially being dragged into the competition, even short of potential conflict. And I think we can achieve our strategic objectives without overstating it, because I think counterintuitively, we can actually potentially imperil some of those objectives by focusing too much on the competitive aspect. But if we continue to reach out, engage with the region through the PIF, through other mechanisms, we can really understand, internalize, and respect the needs of the region. And there's a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram that can really get us where we want to go. I think one way to do that was mentioned previously is to continue to maximize the degree to which we are working with allies and partners in the region, whether it's partners in the Blue Pacific, whether it's the Quad, whether it's more ad hoc trilateral engagements with Japan, who is a fantastic partner, in cases where we can work with Taiwan in the Pacific Islands, a creative, network, flexible, redundant approach is, I think, really going to pay dividends. I will say the Biden administration has made great strides here, elevating the level of the Pacific Islands in U.S. foreign policy. We should grab onto that and move forward. Whoever is in the White House after this has an opportunity to lock in some of these gains and then even move the ball forward, because there is a lot of opportunity. We need to implement, as Chris mentioned, implementation of the compacts is critical. That's going to shape how people in the FAS view the United States. Our reliability, our role and presence in the region is going to depend a lot on that, not just the fact that we got it through Congress. We should continue the biennial summits. We should find ways to get additional congressional involvement and buy-in on policy issues. We mentioned the corruption and elite capture. We definitely need to use the tools of U.S. government to focus on anti-corruption efforts, increase transparency in the region. We've been great about opening up some new embassies, but there's more work to be done there. We need top quality diplomats. We've had some great folks out there, but these are hardship posts. These are very remote locations, very difficult for diplomats who have children, school-age children. We need to do what we can to elevate and emphasize the importance of these positions. Get government officials traveling to outer islands, harness some of the non-government Pacific Islands expertise that's resident in the United States and in Hawaii, for example. Senator Schatz has also pushed for an expansion of Peace Corps programs. Some of that has started, and that's been great because we get some diplomatic boosts from this. But we do run into an issue of overall Peace Corps funding makes it difficult for the Peace Corps to actually expand to the Pacific Islands, where programs are extremely expensive to start fresh again. The senator is also focused on trying to better understand the hazards from unexploded ordnance. We need a full regional survey. We need to make sure that we are going after UXO, particularly in Papua New Guinea, the Solomons, Kiribati, and then putting the resources behind it and show that we are really willing to step up and dedicate some of the financial backing that's necessary to not only to help ensure safety and livelihoods in the Pacific Islands, but again, it redounds to our credibility and reliability in the region if we do that. I mentioned infrastructure. There's a huge need for resilient infrastructure in the region. We have lots of tools in the U.S. government. We've made some great steps there, but there's a lot more to do, bringing in agencies and departments that might not normally prioritize the Pacific. And I would say we should also be looking to see if we can reduce some of the restrictions that might exist. How do we make it easier to build this infrastructure? We don't want to have a race to the bottom and lower standards, because we know how we've all heard the stories of PRC projects, but we do want to make sure it's as easy as possible to achieve our strategic objectives. Finally, veterans, U.S. military veterans who live in the FAS. We finally got Senator Schatz's bill through to allow the VA to provide services to them. We now need to make it happen. This is another huge component in the Pacific Islands. But this is all to say I really believe that Congress's role is absolutely essential. Senator Schatz is going to keep pushing this through, including with his House colleagues, including Chairman Westerman. And I think finally, I'll just say a line that he likes to say when meeting with the Pacific Islands leaders is, "Nothing about me without me." So whenever we're trying to enhance our policy in the region, we need to make sure that we are really doing our due diligence and engaging and really understanding the needs of the region. But I'll leave it there and look forward to the panel discussion.
Thanks again, Zach. And I think once again, Chris and Zach, House and Senate, bipartisan, Republican, Democrat, I think you can see that it is an important issue on the Congress's radar, and they'll continue to sort of look for moving this forward. But there's a lot of good intent and there's a lot of good words. Now, how do you put this intent and words into actual action on the ground? That's the challenge that we are having, looking for creative stuff. So I would look at that from the regional perspective. Let's get into the more specifics on this and to moving the ball forward. Before that, Hide, you've been a real sort of leader on this thing on the Japanese side. You've held or helped organize the Palm 10. You've been in the region since then, visiting everybody. So it'd be great to hear from your perspective, Hide, both on what's the pulse of the folks down in the region, and also how do you see Japan's role working in the region on its own and with America? Over to you, Hide.
Okay, thank you. This year, Japan hosted the 10th Pacific Leaders Summit in July. That is the, I say, the platform of the relationship between Japan and the region through PIF. And the main concern of that meeting was how to restore the trust damaged by Alps treated water. And it indirectly affects the geopolitical situation. And in the discussion of the Palm Summit in the past, it was like a parallel of Japan's vision, like FOIP, and also PIF's vision. But this time, the discussion was very consistent with 2050 strategy by PIF. And as a result, I think for Japan, it was a new beginning for building a multi-layered relationship with Pacific Island countries. And I also visited Tonga last week for observing PIF summit. And it was a very big one. And overall, I felt that it emphasized the centrality of PIF. And all the partners respect that, I think. And also, Pacific Island countries side emphasizes that the people-centered approach is very important in many areas. But the bilateral relations will be diverse. So in Japan, we look at the region as a region, also bilateral basis. And also the important thing is to respect sovereignty of each Pacific Island country when we consider any approach. So from the planning stage of any project, we need to involve the governments of recipient country and the people. And now I'm in Solomon Islands now for the first time in 14 years. And I feel that now Solomon Islands in the new era for the new nation building stage after Ramsey. So I feel very positive atmosphere in the town compared to the situation in 14 years ago. Thank you.
Well, thanks again. We'll come back to it. So over to you, Ambassador Prasad. Now, you've represented your nation very well in DC. Now you're in Canberra. I think the interest, the intent, and the goodwill is certainly grown in Washington, DC towards your nation and to the region. I think there's still a big gap between the intent, the goodwill, and intent, and what we need to actually do on the ground and how to translate into actual stuff on the ground. So it'd be great to hear from you. What are the things we can do better, and as much specificity, that'd be fantastic. Over to you, Ambassador Prasad. And again, thank you for joining from Canberra. I think you're still muted, sir, so you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Coach, and to you and Atlantic Council for having me. So I'll jump into this. It's very good you framed the Pacific engagement with the domestic orientation, and I just wanted to make a few remarks about that. Pacific is very much a domestic U.S. issue as well. Significant parts of U.S. sovereignty are in the Pacific. Guam is in the Pacific. American Samoa is in the Pacific. Across the islands, there are many parts of U.S. that are part of this region. So it should, I hope, both in the Hill and the Senate, that there is a greater understanding as a consequence of increased attention on the Pacific, that U.S. is a geographical part of the Pacific. The second is, you said, in terms of talking to a general audience, I never lose an opportunity to stress how large the Pacific is. It is nearly a third of the surface of the planet. It connects China and US. It connects it's the highways for global trade. It's the highways on which Japan and US's prosperity has been built. And it matters from that perspective. But most of all, it matters to the small island states. And this zone of peace, this area of peace, has been this way since the end of the Second World War. It is not a thing that you can take for granted. On the development parameters today, with the level of stress that small island states face as a consequence of geopolitics, as a consequence of climate change, as a consequence of the development challenges that they face, you cannot take it for granted that these small states or micro states will remain stable and cohesive states long into the future. And I do not want to imagine a very negative outcome for the region, but it is not impossible to imagine a string of islands that are similar to Somalia or Yemen or Haiti, etc., across this region, which both US and China need to build their prosperity on. So that if there's my one message to US and to Japan as well here, is focus on the stark development challenges that these small islands face. And the geopolitical contestation, however you want to look at it, and whichever spin you want to put onto it, it does make the development challenges even steeper. In this region, we face some of the highest NCD rates in the world. The level of stunting in Papua New Guinea is amongst the highest in the world. The urban unemployment would be in 50-60% in most of the urban centers. They're just not creating hope and jobs and opportunities for their young population on the scale that they need. And then climate change comes and wipes it all away. If we were to transpose one of the catastrophic climate change events onto the US economy, for example, Cyclone Pam in Vanuatu a few years back wiped off 70% of its GDP. Large states simply do not feel that level of destruction, that level of devastation. And the US economy is more or less, you can round it off to 30 trillion economy. If you wipe off 20 trillion of the 30 trillion economy, I'd suspect there'd be riots in the streets of across US, and many parts, services, etc., would cease to exist. And yet the islands are expected to continue to face this type of catastrophes, rise with the limited support. And my last two points for US really to consider is that you are in elections mode. These are hard development challenges that these states face. They face very difficult futures ahead, unstable futures ahead. US engagement cannot be on a stop and start basis. It needs to be development challenges are complicated in small states. They require long-term engagement. They require deep partnership. And I hope that both Japan and US can be working much more constructively and pragmatically on some of the difficult challenges, whether they be in telecommunications and communication generally, whether they be in soft and hard infrastructure, that they can bring many pieces of the puzzle, and there's no reason why they cannot bring India as well into on some of the soft side in some of the big challenges that these countries face. And then the last, I've said it in many private meetings. US has some great assets, but listening is certainly not one of the great assets of US foreign policy. And I would encourage it to invest a lot more time in listening and understanding what Pacific Islands are saying and what their leaders are saying, and be able to engage with empathy and with the depth and substance, because if frustration builds up and there's a continued perception that sometimes they are not being listened to, but right language is given. This is certainly not one part of the puzzle, one part of the problem. So I hope that there's a lot more and broader US engagement with the Pacific. I really welcome the increase of US embassies across the Pacific, and I hope that there's a lot more interaction with between our business communities, both ways, between our trade communities, between the political communities, the visit by Congress into the Pacific and vice versa, that these things will create the depth and create more opportunities for listening to the Pacific with real feeling in depth. Thank you very much.
Well, Ambassador, thanks again. And I appreciate your point about us working on our listening ability. I think it's well pointed. I would say that it first starts by actually acknowledging that we've got to do better, and then we can try doing better. So I will take that on and turn it over to Mr. Deveri. Deveri, I think one of the important issues, when from American perspective, when we look at the islands, and at least in our political side of stuff, the question is there a lot of sort of a development project where we need to put in money and keep sort of developing and sustaining them? Or is there a business project that we can get it up to an economic level where there's a business opportunity that will sustain them on itself? And I would love to hear from you, what are the business opportunities? Again, telling Americans who are not good at listening that, hey, this is not just a development project. There's actually, we can make business out of this. And here are some ways where you can make business out of it, which will not only sustain us, but also help you guys. So what would be the way to do that, Deveri?
Yeah, thanks, Kash. And really appreciate Chris and Zach's overview on where the thinking is coming out of Washington. So probably just to kick things off, number one, when the presence of US was vacuous for at least 2-3 decades, it wasn't just the Chinese. The Irish came in via Digicel, and there was a whole lot of other folks that also came through the islands. And obviously, Australia has been there for at least 100 years in the various enterprises that they've participated. The only difference that the Chinese brought, which is a legacy that remains still today, they upended a whole lot of norms that we were used to in the development investment paradigm. I was personally involved in a program that had an oversight on a state contract. Australia had 1,000 pages on an infrastructure project. The Chinese had a 3-page MOU worth almost $150 million US. Now that type of genre has completely changed the way that ministers, senior officials deal with infrastructure projects forever. We now know that there is an option to go with a 3-pager with a lot of money, or 1,000 pages with all the guardrails and standards. And at that same token, the private investments that have come in from China are also worth noting. I just recently completed a Chinese investment report in PNG. In the past 4 years, there has been a sharp drop on Chinese investments, largely because of the Marape government freezing investments from China and looking at increasing investments from the West. However, the drop in those state-owned enterprise projects, it's actually increased in diaspora Chinese investments. Now that flow-on effect has again taught us that there's still active money flowing in from Beijing, not from government-to-government contracts, but business acquisitions. And again, we're not entirely sure what those sorts of investments will be impacting in the Pacific. So that's just the first point that I'm trying to make, that the dynamics of China-led investments in the past 20, 30 years, pre-BRI, current BRI, has really changed the way that leaders look at development, look at investment. Now, at the same time, I guess the one example in PNG, which has really brought the American entrepreneur spirit into my country, is the ExxonMobil LNG investment. That particular investment completely changed our view on how to do business. We saw how Houston cut and paste and came in with all the force. We saw how the subcontractors came in. And that project turned around. It was a nation-building project that a whole lot of us experienced what would happen if a genuine foreign direct investment keen to invest in PNG, even setting up shop and looking at other projects in the country that they could participate in. And that to me is the golden star of American investments in the Pacific. It's not a one-off flyby. You're actually making a serious commitment to look at a commodity, to develop a commodity. But the other journey, which I find exciting in the Exxon space, is a national content part of the story. The workforce is almost entirely Papua New Guinean. It's almost entirely women. And there are huge transformations that have happened in the interior parts of Papua New Guinea that have never had women in the workforce. So the Exxon experience, contrary to probably Exxon in other parts of the world, this is a golden star that I definitely see, one that we can definitely frame a story around. The second example that I just want to quickly make is in that 10, 15 years that we didn't have the interest of the US and probably more interest from Australia, thousands of our engineers were educated by Huawei on networking. So there's a whole generation of PNG network engineers that either Digicel, Telstra, everyone else is sourcing. It came from Huawei, largely because there wasn't anyone in the West that wanted to educate these engineers. 3 years ago, I was part of a team that was exploring AWS to use or to be part of our government technology stack. That was the first time that we had an American technological enterprise interested in building a capability in PNG. Again, the impressive thing was it didn't take long for the engineers to understand the AWS footprint, largely because for all their lives, they've actually been touching American tech, but they haven't actually had the opportunity to be immersed in American tech. So the simple story in what I'm trying to pertain here is, and coming back to some of the things that Deputy Secretary of State Kirk Campbell said last year, it's about trying to look at the nodes that American capability can close off final mile in getting those products into the marketplace. So whether it's tuna or sardines from the Marshall Islands into Walmart, or whether it's looking at AWS or Google cables into our part of the world, that's the part of ingenuity that we're really looking at, thinking outside the box. I've been involved in European Union, Australian bilateral programs with the Pacific for a couple of years. One of the greatest challenges the EU and also to a large extent Australia faced, we did not have a private sector angle in the way that we were having our diplomacy. And again, I think one of the great things that America has exercised with tremendous leadership is what's happened in Africa under your Goods Opportunity Act. That particular type of model where you've used a fusion of aid, you've used a fusion of commercials to get into Africa, upending the critical mineral space, the pharmaceutical space, the agricultural space. That's a sort of genre that the Pacific is quite interested in looking at. Those lessons of AGOA could add great value in the way that we're structuring some of those issues in especially trade investment in the Pacific. Thanks, Kush. I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, no, those are great ideas. So I think, Catherine, you've been running point from our side on this topic. So first of all, hats off to you for great leadership on your end at National Security Council. I think, again, hats off on the Pacific Partnership Strategy. I think that's brilliant, holding the meeting in the White House. So now you're out of government. I think it'd be good to get, first, I hope you've been listening. If not, you need to do more listening, as Satyendra mentioned. And then after you listen to it, what are the issues that we need to do more rapidly, quickly, low-hanging fruit, top 3 priorities in your mind in moving the ball forward? Over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Kaush, and thanks to all the great speakers, my fellow speakers that have already gone. I've heard so many great comments that I very much agree. Zach had some very insightful notes, some of which I'll double down on, and Ambassador Prasad, always good to see you and appreciate your points on some of the challenges facing the Pacific. You're absolutely right. I think we're at a really interesting time right now in the Pacific relationship. As has already been mentioned, our attention to the region over the last few decades was periodic at best. We've yet always been a Pacific nation, as Ambassador Prasad doubled down on. And this is a key area of strategic interest for the United States. And last years saw a very big ramp up, and that was interest all the way to the top, very bipartisan interest in the region, as I think heard from our colleagues earlier in the panel today. But I see this as we're at really a pivot point right now. As I see it, we're moving into this second phase, right? This first phase was defined by engagement, high-level visits, big news-making promises, the COFA negotiations following through, really big deal for us. But now we're at a phase where what's next? And we're at a time when the U.S. needs to prove and demonstrate our commitment and our reliability, really, to the region, and also where we get through on so many of these big promises that we've been rolling out. A lot of that has started. We've started embassies, some really great announcements. Last week, we heard Kurt Campbell at the PIF leaders meeting that we were going to have consular services in Tonga, which was a huge ask from the region. Again, listening to the region, trying to respond to their needs, but a lot more is needed. Note a couple areas that I think we really need to drill down on, and this would be for either administration moving forward. And again, fortunate that this is such a bipartisan topic system, because I do believe that the attention on the region will continue. Diplomatic presence. As Zach noted, we've started open news embassies, but a lot more is needed. We still vastly are outnumbered by the Chinese, not only in number of embassies across the region, but in personnel. And the Chinese reportedly 10 to 30 people on the ground in most of these countries where we might have 2 or 3, right? Part of that is it is very difficult. Diplomats out to the region, hardship of difficulty for people with children. That's already been noted. We are really struggling to resource our diplomacy, and that really is much bigger than State Department, right? That is something that is a congressional mandate. It's something we need to double down on as a whole of government effort. The solutions to that potentially is to look beyond the State Department, have attaches from other departments and agencies. We've got Department of Transportation more involved in Department of Energy, agriculture, huge issues of agriculture in the region. So there are lots of creative ways that we could look at beefing up what we're doing in the region. Next is maritime security and maritime domain awareness. A lot already in that domain, but a lot more is needed. And this is an area that I think that the needs of the Pacific really intersect with our own national security needs in the U.S. We've had efforts to ramp up our Coast Guard. There's another Coast Guard ship going out to the region. We are doing more with our partners and allies, but again, so much more needed. And I'd like to double down on something Ambassador Prasad said about the vastness of this region. And oftentimes people look at the Pacific and all they see is big space, right? And lots of tiny little islands. But look up sometime on the map exclusive economic zones of these islands. And that makes it an interlocking extent, really, from the Philippines out to Hawaii of maritime domains and zones that these islands have exclusive rights to and need to protect their own maritime resources, which are also global maritime resources. So how do we help do that? One other area I think we could work a lot more with the partners and allies on is the media, free media in the region. This is an area where, you know, it's already been mentioned that the China issue in terms of how we frame the China problem. And this is not a region that needs to be lectured on how dangerous China is and the downfalls of it. These are smart, pragmatic leaders, democratic governments. They understand the challenges, but they are also faced with a lot of challenges themselves. And yet there's a lot of independent journalism going on in the Pacific that is highlighting this themselves. And how do we help amplify Pacific voices and help tell those stories, which I think will come across a lot better than just the US coming in or partners and allies coming in and lecturing again on China. And then one other piece I think we need to really think strongly about moving forward is this working with partners, and this gets to working with Japan, which has been a great partner in Pacific. We saw some of this with the partners in the Blue Pacific, a strategic level coordination mechanism between the US, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, and now others have joined in as well. There's a lot of interest in the Pacific, and yet these are small governments. They easily get overwhelmed when they have lots of different partners trying to bring in. And how do we better as a group listen to the Pacific and the Pacific Island Forum in terms of what they're needing? I think there's a lot more we could do specifically with Japan, maritime domain awareness, on infrastructure, on ICT. They're already a fantastic partner along with Australia on much of what we're doing. But there's a lot more that we could be doing in those realms. And I feel like some of what Duveri said about the creativity and the innovation needed when we look at investment and business, and this is a really hard region, right? When we look at the distances, the small populations, how do we help enhance these economies? How do we help these economies be sustained? It takes creativity. This is not an area where it's easy for businesses to enter into. We saw this with the Pacific Connect with Google going across the Pacific and working with our governments and Australia and New Zealand and Japan and others on how we deliver connectivity to some islands that have never had connectivity before. And that was a great success story. I'll just leave it there. There's a whole lot going on in this region. There's a lot of really exciting opportunities, but a lot of really steep challenges as well. But I remain optimistic and positive that we're moving in the right direction.
Well, thanks again, Catherine. I'll come back to you, but over to you, Katara-san. I mean, I think, Katara, you've been on both ends of issues on several of this within government out for a while. It'd be great to hear from you as to what are the most fertile and promising area for US-Japan collaboration within the region. Because there's not a stronger partner for us anywhere in the Indo-Pacific than Japan. You are literally the strongest partner we have, and it is a partnership that is, forged with a lot of turmoil to build it as strong as it is. So couldn't be more proud of it. So over to you.
Thank you, Kosh, and thank you for Atlantic Council for hosting this and having me as one of the panelists. A lot has been said, and especially what I wanted to say was almost all covered by Catherine. So there's not much to add, but if I could step back a little bit and touch upon 3 principles that I think are critical in building constructive relationships with Pacific Island countries and as the region as a whole. And I think that resonates with what US is doing, Japan is doing, and other allies are doing. Principle number 1, I think, is to emphasize and share the importance of the free and open international rule-based order, which includes strong opposition to any unilateral attempts to change the status quo by threat or use of force or coercion. It also includes recognizing the rights, freedoms, responsibility, and sovereignty of all countries, regardless of their size and power. Principle number 2, I believe, is to provide high-quality alternatives, options, and focus on strengthening mutually beneficial and supportive relationships. This is different from asking Pacific Island countries or to pressure them to choose sides, which, as mentioned before, from me, Chris, Zach, and Ambassador Prasad, you eloquently mentioned that as well. And I think principle number 3 is to respect centrality, unity, and ownership of Pacific Island countries, which was also mentioned by Ambassador Prasad and also Duveri as well. For example, providing support aligned to the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, 2050 strategy, and its implementation plan, 2050 IP. And I believe that the US and its allies, including Japan, are acting according to these principles. Like-minded countries coordinating and cooperating through different architectures, and they are doing such as Quad, which had its foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo in July this year. And I think this is one of the forums that US and Japan are working closely together, as well as Australia and India. And I understand that this is my speculation, but its leaders meeting could take place later this month, and Pacific Islands is one of the focus areas for Quad, among others. Partners in the Blue Pacific is another initiative that was mentioned by Catherine, and I think this is another forum that US and Japan are working together. So there are lots of unilateral, multilateral negotiations, cooperations with the field in the Pacific Islands. In terms of the bilateral cooperation with the US and Japan, we recently saw a statement by US and Japan from Tonga. US Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell was there, and also Japanese Parliamentary Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, Homura Masahiro, was there as well. So we saw the joint statement and the spirit of cooperation is shown there. In terms of specific areas of cooperation, Catherine eloquently mentioned that, so I will not repeat, but MDA, infrastructure, ICT, and other areas, I think, are quite important in terms of the focus area. And if I could mention briefly about the Japan's effort in particular, and Hide already mentioned this, but the Pacific Islands Leaders Meeting, so-called PALM, P-A-L-M, is worth highlighting, I believe. Japan has been hosting this summit-level meeting every 3 years since 1997. And this year in July, as Hide mentioned, was the 10th PALM meeting, which was held in Japan, Tokyo. And representatives from 18 Pacific Islands Forum members, as well as Japan, joined this meeting, and they endorsed the Leaders' Declaration and PALM 10 Joint Action Plan. Declaration had 8 pages, and Joint Action Plan had 11 pages. And according to Duveri's assumption, maybe it is too long, but I think it is a good thing to have a long leaders' commitment to the region, to have a concrete plan laid out there so that it will be done, the implementation can be done in the future. In terms of the principles that I mentioned before, I think principle number 1 is reflected in its declaration paragraphs 16 and 17. Principle 3 is shown in paragraph 10, along with the 7 priority areas of cooperation articulated in the 2050 strategy. Principle 2 is not directly mentioned, but it is an underlying theme and tradition of PALM as well. So overall, I think it is encouraging to see these efforts being done by Japan and US and other allies. I believe that these efforts need to be continued with 3 principles in mind, and that these require empathy and patience, as Ambassador Prasad mentioned. It is certainly not an easy task and requires continuity in policymaking and implementations, as Catherine mentioned at the end. So with that, I would like to hand the mic back to you, Kosh, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. We've got about 15 minutes. So this is how we're going to do it. I think we need to have something more concrete, or at least ideas. And so I'm going to go back first to the region, and so have Ambassador Yu and Deveri sort of react to it, and then follow up with Hidei, Kotaro, and then Catherine, and then we'll wrap up and give last 2 words to Zach and Chris. So if I see it, and I think Catherine phrased it right, what you say, but there's first phase, second phase, we are going from rhetoric, which is all good, intent good, to action, what are the stuff? And within the region, just building off you guys' comments, and I will just put the buckets, like 4 buckets of what we can do, and not by any means exhaustive or sort of restricting, but just to make the conversation going. So there's certainly a very strong element of human capital. I think the human capital within the region, training, improving everything from Huawei to education to sort of opportunities to connections to the world. Human capital, it's really that's where every country is down. So what is it? And this is the strength of US and the Quad to be able to do it. What can we do it? What training centers can we put in place? That's one aspect of it. Second thing is this sort of maritime security, which is everything from dealing with disasters, whether it be typhoons, like we mentioned, to illegal fishing, to everything else revolves around maritime security in an important sort of point. The third one is just more sort of public service, normal development, that's bread and butter, health, other things that we can provide. And the fourth element is sort of economic engagement, economic development, economics, a business side of stuff. And towards that end, AGOA is one suggestion that Deveri mentioned. I think is certainly a fascinating one. Do we also need to establish within the region a better transport network? I think there's an evaluation and rapidly sort of development within the transport world. So what can we bring the regions working together? Should we set up a sort of more seafood processing within the region as opposed to shutting it out? And if that was the case, then AGOA makes sense as well. So there are some ideas there that one can look at it. So give me something, concrete that we can work on in these 4 areas, not limited to them. I'll go first to you, Ambassador Prasad, then to Deveri, then we'll get the thoughts from Hidei and Kotaro, Catherine, and then wrap it up. Over to you, Ambassador Prasad.
Thanks. So first, that's a very good bucketing categories on the maritime security. No brainer. I think that's ready for ramp up. Great progress, as Catherine has said. Scale of challenges are huge. Kiribati, if its EEZ were transposed onto US mainland, it would cover something like a third of US mainland, and Kiribati is one naval asset. So it's no brainer. The IUU, the value of fisheries that is lost to IUU is probably in the 2 to 3 billion annual range. So that's human capital is very much tied to that. So if you were to focus on the maritime security and the oceanography, marine sciences, engineering, and everything that is put together into the maritime security, that could be a good area of focus in which US as well as Japan has great advantage. So I'd really package that together. On health and the social services, so I know this audience understands the geography very well. These are countries, many islands, distance between the islands, cost of shipping, and all that type of thing to move services around the island to small communities. Very difficult, but a great technological progress. No reason why drones cannot be involved in delivery of services and satellite technologies, etc. So there's a great thing to be said about bringing technological and innovation, etc., to improve services to the last island, like the last mile, and that would sort of restore some greater stability in many of the outer islands, which are often very vulnerable to geopolitical pressures, I would say. So great. On the economic side, very, very significant. Many of these countries are not debt stressed, are highly debt exposed. For them to be able to make the right development choices, to make the right political choices, they need to have stable economic order over a decade period. And to me, the greatest thing that especially the countries in Melanesia, some of the sort of most vulnerable countries could have, would be some predictability and stability about what is the nature of US support to these countries, that you have 5-10-year kind of financial partnerships, and they look at some sectors of the economy, including providing drivers for private sector growth, etc. I would encourage US to look at the PALM framework. I quite like the PALM framework. That's a very good framework for framing a predictable and a bit more long-term kind of engagement that's comforting to finance ministers and others who are making large policy decisions. And I hope when the third US President and Pacific Leaders Summit takes place, that some of the ideas that you are probing over here can take shape and become part of the proposal packages for the third summit, which President Biden has indicated will be taking place at some point in the future. I'm sure, of course, after the elections. Thanks.
No, again, thank you, Ambassador. Over to you, Deverick. I mean, I think I just want to talk about talk fish, seafood processing. Of course, don't forget tourism, which is directly related to the transport network. So it'd be good to hear from you. What are the issues within that particular spectrum, which you feel are the most promising one?
Yeah. Look, I guess the first thing is this. This is a relationship that's resetting again, and so we shouldn't try and rush everything in 5 years or 7 years. Some of this needs to play out, and I just want to give 2 examples why the organic part of this relationship is critical. There's currently a USAID program helping Papua New Guinea electrify 70% of our folks. And one of the most impressive things about this program run by RTI is that you're actually seeing a fusion of impact investors, social enterprise capabilities, and also Quad partners, Japan and others, coming into the mix to look at helping PNG achieve its electrification targets. That's the sort of innovation that Catherine picked up on. That's a sort of innovation on some of these things that we need to let them play out. And playing out would effectively identify that this particular supply chain hub, this is where the investment needs to happen because it can cluster 5 islands. A United Airlines plane can land here, pick up the goods, and head to America, or vice versa. You can head to Tokyo or even down to Australia. That the energy that I'm seeing within this electrification program, which is really where America has come back to Papua New Guinea in terms of its aid footprint. So I do see a development-led, investment-led. It needs to have that organic environment for it to play out. The second part, and this is where I kind of lean into some of the observations that I've made on AGOA, is where entirely new industries have been created because of the challenges and impacts in Africa. The pharmaceuticals that have flourished in South Africa, even those in other parts of Southern Africa as well, and not forgetting the huge interest on critical minerals. How those markets attracted investments, it largely came from a state ecosystem that allowed the American private sector, the African private sector to connect. This is the sort of thing that I'm hearing increasingly from businesses in the Pacific. We need some sort of lubrication that can allow us to look at those nodes that are completely broken, vacuous, that we can come up with some level of creativity in the supply chain space. So that's the part of the domain that I think a Pacific version of AGOA would be interesting to explore. I just want to quickly jump on maritime security and some of the important developments that have happened. As some of you may know, PNG got struck by a horrible mudslide that killed tens of thousands of people up in our Enge province, Malatuka, a couple of months ago. The coordination that Quad made on the support program, I must admit, it's one of the most impressive that I've seen on disaster responses in PNG. Australia naturally took the lead. We had some Ospreys that came up from Indo-PACOM that delivered into those areas. India supplied a whole lot of products, and there was a Japanese team that went in, Australia geotech team that went in. Now that level of coordination that happened in Malatuka, it's a clear example that the type of maritime security that we're talking about in the Pacific, it's not hard security, it's this type of soft security. Given all of the other type of natural disasters that we're going to face, which our Commissioner Prasad identified in Vanuatu, it's this type of capability that has to be the focus on maritime security domain, apart from the IUU and the others in the fisheries, because that's the vacuum, that is the people challenge that we have when we're trying to go into those areas where volcanoes, tidal waves, or hurricanes have occurred. The last point I just want to make quickly, Kash, is one of the successes that Australia and by and large Western alliances have made in the Pacific is institutional building. High Commissioner Prasad and I, we are examples of aid that has actually capacitated our knowledge. And that is a 40-year project, 50-year project that the West has given the Pacific. So we know there is a generation that values Western outlook. There's a generation that values the importance of the rule of law. And this is the sort of investment that I would encourage more US involvement, more Quad involvement, because this is much more important to us than roads and bridges. Once you capacitate and educate us, we know how to solve the problems. We know how to talk to you to solve these issues. And a classical case is a good friend of mine has just pushed out around about 400 students all over the Quad. He left 170 of them in the US a couple of months ago, in Louisiana, in North Dakota. He's taking a couple up to India. He'll be taking a couple up to Japan and several to Australia. If there's any benefit, if there's any net interest that this geopolitics is providing us, the West is opening their doors to this type of capability. And certainly from our perspective, that's much more precious for us to go and invest. So as we organically develop what these capabilities look like, the onus also comes back on folks like us to really, really identify that this is where we need to spend our time and energy over investing in infrastructure, which are important, but the human infrastructure, I think, is more critical. Thanks, Kush.
Got it. Great. So now we're down to 3 minutes. So it's been pretty much of a pretty rushed round, but the folks in the region get the more time. So over to you, Hidey. I think US, Japan, both are Pacific countries. What are the highest sort of partnership? I know you mentioned infrastructure. Anything else? This is pretty much the last word. I'll do a quick round. So over to you, Hidey, for the last thoughts on it.
Oh, okay. Our foundation has many projects in the Pacific, and I can talk about the maritime security project in the FAS countries.
Okay.
And I also working for enhancing US-Japan relationship. And reality is, I visit your embassies in Tokyo since 2016 frequently to share our ideas. Also, when I visit those countries, I visit your embassies to share enhance or cooperate things.
All right, thanks. Katara, over to you. I think quickly, yes.
Thank you. Just quickly, I think some of the examples are included in the Palm 10 Joint Action Plan, so I recommend you to go over it. But one example is the MCT, Mobile Cooperation Team, sent from the Japan Coast Guard in terms of maritime security, your bucket 2. Your bucket 4 did talk about strengthening economic and trade partnership, and I think one of the initiative is Pacific Japan Investment Seminar, which is to be held in October 2024, which relates to the Expo 2025. So I think there are lots of concrete ideas going on, but as Catherine and others said, implementation is important.
All right. Okay. Next. So the second phase, Catherine. I think any parting thoughts on the second phase?
So very briefly, I'll just hit on quick things that I think would be important to implement specifically. One, to get a permanent ambassador out to the Pacific Island Forum. We have a TDY one right now, Ambassador Frankie Reed. She's been fantastic, but getting a permanent ambassador there and then hopefully having other partners and allies follow suit be a way to help reinforce the centrality of the Pacific Island Forum and its importance. The second thing is, as we look to connect the Pacific with ICT across the board, we need to start thinking about cybersecurity also as the next phase, as these nations will be very vulnerable to cybersecurity, both by malign actors, but also malign governments. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, over to you, Chris. I think, you've had great examples here. It's great leadership, a Pacific country, and a tremendous thing that COFA that we can expand into other parts, just the parts of it. So over to you, Chris. Yeah.
Thanks, Karsh. I appreciate all the comments of the fellow panelists and presenters today. My takeaway from this conversation, right? We need to continue to demonstrate our commitment. The United States can't develop a pattern of bopping in and bopping out when we reach deadlines. We've got to work with these nations to build their capacity, to invest in them and empower them to utilize their own resources and their own capacity, and we need to be present. I think I'll leave it at that.
Brilliant. No, can't have those words stronger from a domestic agency and domestic committee. Over to you, Zach.
Thanks. I'll just echo those comments and say we've got a little more sweat equity we need to put into building a coalition on the Hill with the executive branch, with think tanks, with the business community to try to push this forward, because that sustained presence won't happen on its own. It's going to take us really building on the work that others have done before us. But I'm optimistic. I think we can do it. We can get the bipartisan support, but it is going to take a lot of work, and hopefully we can make some good progress here.
Okay, this has been brilliant, guys. I mean, you basically just scratched the surface, but I think the notion we've got the commitment, we're moving to a second phase. There are things we can learn from Japan. I think the idea of a sustained engagement on the Palm kind of a line of thought is a worthy thing to look at. Nothing is more important than human infrastructure and human capital there are many areas that we can look, everything from Peace Corps to other fellowship, bringing in here in the region, issues related to it. And I think the economic stuff and the maritime security element, particularly with Quad involved. So lots there to chew on. I think there's a lot of examples from COFA that we are doing, the bits and parts of it. That is a 20-year engagement, a reflection of having a 20-year engagement similar to that to the region, I think is useful in many different variations. So a lot of sort of grist for the mill here. And I think we'll have a second discussion, but we're going to try to keep emphasizing the notion of a domestic, foreign, regional, and alliances. These are 4 areas of how we're going to engage in this. On our domestic side, bipartisan, on our ally side, and particularly working with the region, with the leadership of the region, and listening to the region. With those words, I think we've hit the mark, our deep appreciation, and to be continued. Have a great day and a great evening, and thanks again for those who came in from long ashore. Have a good day. Thanks again. Bye.